Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
In Cut the Clutter today, we do a bit of storytelling and also a little bit of navel gazing in conclusion. So the story many of you are familiar with. This is what happened at the New York Times. It published an op-ed by a Republican Party senator asking for troops to be called out to put down the protests that broke out after George Floyd's killing in Minneapolis. That led to a furor in the liberal community, also within the Times newsroom. American papers, as you know, have Chinese walls between their opinion sections and their news sections. But yet there was a dispute. Finally it led to the departure of the opinion editor, who had not been there for a long time. But he's quite a star in American media, so he's left. And after that, there's been a lot of discussion and debate. This is discussion and debate as much about race relations in America or about how American media covers it, but it's also about diversity in the newsroom, and it also raises questions about whether the definition of journalism now needs to be changed. It needs to be rewritten from what it was in the past, the classical definition being fair, objective, seeming to be objective, etc., etc. Does that work any longer or not? So these are important questions and debates. There are also interesting stories behind it. So before I tell you the story, as all good storytellers are supposed to do, I will first tell you the cast of characters. So a few names I will mention to you who are essential to this story. A few more figure here and there, but they are not key characters. So one, George Floyd, we know he is the African American man who was killed when a police officer put his knee on his neck and he kept on saying, "I can't breathe," but nobody listened. The police didn't listen and he died. Number two, there is Tom Cotton. Tom Cotton is the Republican Party senator for Arkansas. He wrote this op-ed in the New York Times with the headline, "Call Out the Army." Ben Smith is the New York Times media correspondent. We'll talk about that. James Bennett is the New York Times, was the New York Times opinion editor. He was quite a star. He's just 54, yet he had been the New York Times' White House correspondent, Beijing correspondent, Jerusalem correspondent, also the 14th editor of the Atlantic magazine, which is quite reputed, editor-in-chief of the Atlantic. And then in 2016, he came back to the Times as its opinion page editor. So he came to that job very young, 2016. He was just about 50 yet. And he made some radical changes to the paper's opinion section, like bringing some right-wing voices. So he brought in, for example, Bret Stephens, who draws a lot of criticism from the liberal crowd in America. Now, Bret Stephens is another of the characters in this story. He is a right-wing conservative or neoconservative columnist and thinker. He's written some good stuff. I am his reader and I quite enjoy reading him. He's one of those less nutty conservatives, although he gets attacked a lot for things like questioning how damaging climate change is in the long run. But on the American right, he's a Trump critic. So in a way, a little bit center right. So he's done two important books besides much other writing. One, America in Retreat, The New Isolationism and the Coming Global Disorder. This was written, mind you, in 2014. So he foresaw what was going to happen correctly, although he might have thought at that point that maybe Republicans will come to power in America and this will change. On the other hand, with Trump's coming to power, America has retreated even further and the global disorder is much bigger than before. His second book, Has Obama Made the World a More Dangerous Place? He's a controversial fellow, and we'll tell you more about him as we go ahead. And there is A.J. Sulzberger, the young publisher of the New York Times, from the long tradition of the Sulzberger family. Marty Baron, the executive editor of the Washington Post. There is Michael Brown, an 18-year-old black African American who was killed again by a policeman, apparently without cause. Also, although the policeman finally was acquitted of the charge of murder in Missouri, in a place called Ferguson, Missouri, by a policeman. Policeman's name was Darren Wilson. Michael Brown was 18, Darren Wilson was 28, and finally one more name we'll mention for you, that is Wesley Lowery. Wesley Lowery should now be about 30. He was 24 in Ferguson when this incident happened, and he made his fame, the dust up with CNN anchor Joe Scarborough when he called to say that he had been pushed around by the police, and he was advised that if the police tells you to get out of the way, you get out of the way. He was then a young Washington Post reporter. Continued on talking about race issues in a way that Washington Post did not like, finally left the paper some time back. He also features in this complicated story. Now, a lot of the story we are taking comes from this article by Ben Smith. Ben Smith is one of America's foremost media columnists. He's only 44. People work hard quite early in their lives and make a name for themselves. In India, most people at that age will not be taken seriously as media columnists or any columnists. They'll be seen as bloggers. So he's worked at Politico earlier. He's been at the New York Times fairly recently. So he's done this long piece, and surprise of surprises, where has it been published? It's been published in the New York Times, explaining what happened with this op-ed, what happened that led to the opinion page editor, a superstar opinion page editor's departure. He was in fact widely expected to take over after the current executive editor of the New York Times, that is Dean Beckwith, retired after reaching his retirement age, which is 66. Now, I'm quoting a lot from Ben Smith's article. So he talks about, he says that what you are seeing right now in American media is rooted in what happened, say, in the Washington Post in August of 2014. So August 10, 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri, Michael Brown, 18-year-old, was killed by Darren Wilson, the cop, the 28-year-old cop. The cop claimed it was self-defense. Popularly, this was rejected. Then it kept on, there were riots and there were protests, and it kept on coming back because the grand jury did not indict him for murder, and then finally Department of Justice let him go. But it also said that the police's processes have to be reformed when it comes to dealing with people of African American extraction. So that is the short story, but this report, this was witnessed by this Washington Post reporter whose name we mentioned to you earlier, Wesley Lowery, and he had this dust up with Joe Scarborough, and then that obviously stayed with him, and then he came back and he began talking about race issues from inside the Washington Post newsroom, which the Washington Post did not approve of. To cut the small story short, Martin Barron, who is a wonderful editor, it's a joy to listen to him, and he's built Washington Post into a real powerhouse in spite of all the nonsense that Donald Trump throws at it all the time. But Marty Barron is much more in the conservative school of editors, which means propriety in the newsroom. So he did not like it. Warnings were served on Lowery. At some point he left. There was also a warning from the of the HR department, which, as you know, usually tends to be more cold-blooded and more clinical and more straightforward. So this has now caused a debate in American newsrooms all over. What happened in the Times? What is it that Senator Cotton Wright that caused the trouble? He said, besides other things, he said some elites have excused this orgy of violence in the spirit of radical chic. You've heard those lines very often in India also. You might have heard those lines also in connection with Jamia, JNU, CAA protests. Some elites have excused this orgy of violence in the spirit of radical chic, calling it an understandable response to the wrongful death of George Floyd. And then he goes on to say this is false moral equivalence, and this movement has been taken over by looters and nihilist criminals. Now, how often do you hear that word these days? Takes you right back to early 70s. And then he also reminds the reader that presidents like Eisenhower, Kennedy and Johnson have all called out the army in the past. In the past, it was done by Eisenhower, Kennedy and Johnson, basically to stop those who were preventing the desegregation of race at schools. So actually, army was then called out to defend reforms in race relations. And also that later in 1992, George Bush Sr. called out the army in Los Angeles when race riots were taking place. So his point was, what is the big deal if you call out the army now? That led to a furor. So the New York Times now has put an explanation on top of that article, which I think is too clever by half. I'm not going to read it because it takes too much time, but you can see it running on our screen. The only important thing they say is that the headline was incendiary, but that is not something that the author had written. That is something that the New York Times had written. You can see in this explanation, they are blaming editorial processes rather than to say that we were wrong to run this article. I think what they are trying to suggest is that even if we ran this article, they should have gone through better editorial diligence, and certain charges and statements that have been made as if they were fact should have been questioned or should have been qualified. That's the reason I'm saying it's too clever by half. But so be it, that is what the story is. So what Ben Smith has done is he's spoken to journalists, young and old, in several newsrooms and also to publishers, and he's come up with many observations which I think are very interesting for all of us. There is a line that's come, I suppose, from a senior in the New York Times newsroom, which I like very much, that what's happening right now is between young social justice warriors versus older free speech absolutists. He's also spoken with Wesley Lowery because he thinks that this churn started with his experience in Ferguson, Missouri, and also his brush with Joe Scarborough, who is a big star at CNN. So there's a line he has from Joe Scarborough, which I will quote to you. Joe Scarborough tells Ben Smith, "I look at everything differently and would never do that again. I should have kept my mouth shut." So these are new realizations, new beliefs and new changes that are taking place in the newsrooms. Now much more has happened after that. Not just James Bennett, who has left as opinion editor of the New York Times, even the executive editor of Philadelphia Inquirer has had to resign because they carried a headline saying buildings matter too. You know, what is it a play on? It's a play on Black Lives Matter. So that was seen as insensitive and he's had to go. Now the big debate remains the same. What are your core values? Is it the truth or is it the perception of objectivity? So that is the debate. I might have my own view on it, but I'm keeping that out of it because this, after all, Cut the Clutter is about facts and about me decluttering a complex issue for you. Now the New York Times itself was run and founded by very conservative, very strong editors. There is also a fascinating mention of A.M. Rosenthal, or Abe Rosenthal as he was called. He was one of the greatest editors of our times. I had the good fortune of knowing him in 1984 as somebody just 27. I walked into the newsroom of the New York Times as a fellow of the American Society of Newspaper Editors on a fellowship administered by Fletcher School and Tufts University, and I was taken immediately to meet Abe Rosenthal because he was seen to be an old India hand there. He had served in India, he had traveled in India, he knew India very well. In fact, as I walked in, he said, "Are you Gupta or Gupte?" Because those days New York Times used to have a correspondent in Africa called Gupte. Nevertheless, he was a very strong conservative editor and he was known to be very strict with reporters who tended to veer too far to the left, because that's how young journalists usually tend to be. When Abe Rosenthal died, in fact, they engraved on his grave, "He kept the paper straight." Now, how straight can you keep a paper these days in such polarized times? In America, Donald Trump throws abuse at you. In India, Narendra Modi doesn't do it directly, but so many people on social media and elsewhere attack you, anti-national, prostitute, etc., etc., etc. I mean, I'm only mentioning to you what is still mentionable. Stuff that is thrown at us mostly is entirely unmentionable in polite company. So what happens then in such a polarized situation? Could a Rosenthal have managed this situation? So A.G. Sulzberger, the current young new Sulzberger who's running the Times as publisher, he tells this columnist Ben Smith, he says, we are not retreating from the principles of independence and objectivity. We don't pretend to be objective about things like human rights and racism. Once again, interestingly put, but I would say, in my view, too clever by half. Because what's happening is, as the columnist puts it, today many things are getting mixed up. There is politics, there is culture, and there is business models. And what's important here is business models. Because there was a time when advertisers paid you a lot of money. So your subscriber paid you some for the copy of the paper, and advertisers paid the rest. Now advertisers are paying less and less. One, because they have less and less money, the economies are in a bad way. And second, because advertising is available on the web at much cheaper prices. So newspapers, media organizations now have to get subscription revenues on the web. For those subscribers who pay you money on the web, there is a general belief that they have to agree with what you are saying. So people will fund what they agree with. Foundations will fund what they agree with. So it is that element also which is now coming in. And that's why for many conservatives, newsroom conservatives, it would seem like the New York Times took the wrong call. That they, while we may see it as a big moral call, there's also a commercial or a business aspect to it which cannot be overlooked. While beginning this episode of Cut the Clutter, I had promised you that we'll do some navel gazing in the end. So here we are. Go to the homepage of theprint.in and check out the Code of Ethics for the print journalists. It says that this Code of Ethics guides and mandates public, professional, personal, and most importantly in this context, online conduct expected of every employee of the print. It says reputation of the print depends on the conduct of each employee. We give all our employees a wide leeway in terms of their views on social media, etc., etc., but we draw the line someplace. And this is the line that we even draw for people who may not be linked to us, who may not be our contract holders, who may just be casual contributors, because there are some areas where we draw the line and we will not tolerate any violation. And one of those areas is the reference again that you find in our Code of Ethics that says that we shall not publish offensive, biased references to a person's religion, caste, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation or disability. So we shall not publish it, but also we shall not accept or tolerate any such from anybody, not just our employees, but even those who we might be hosting casually or occasionally on our columns. These are regular calls that need to be taken in the newsrooms, and the right calls are always taken. Now, navel gazing over, I will also talk about the coronavirus situation for just a minute. Look at the state of Delhi. Today, the Supreme Court has come down quite hard on Delhi government, and I'm quite surprised at how Delhi government is letting things go out of control in Delhi. If you look at the current testing numbers, quite strangely, it is actually, I don't know, Kafkaesque, is that the right description? But some things happened that as Delhi's cases have gone up, Delhi's test numbers have come down. And you can look at this graphic. Only yesterday, tests went up a little bit, but just look at the positivity rate in Delhi. Positivity rate in Delhi is now touching 40%. If your positivity rate is more than 10%, you have to increase testing. So Delhi, which is now conducting maybe 5,000, yesterday 5,200 tests, Delhi should be conducting 15,000, 18,000 tests every day, because a problem will not go away if we hide away from it. So look at this graphic and ask the right questions.